Welcome to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. It is time to make nutrition part of the conversation. I'm your host, Christina Veselak, and I'm so glad you're here. Did you know that it's our brain's job to allow us to cope with stress gracefully? But to do that, it needs to be fed optimally. Have you ever wondered why so many committed people relapse or maybe even die? Why so many people on psychotropic medication still feel lousy and still have cravings? What if the missing piece is food, the right food? What if the right nutrients like amino acids or even eating protein every 4 hours could actually balance your brain chemistry and your mood without medication and support lasting recovery? In this podcast, we explore the powerful connection between feeding your brain well, mental health, relapse, and recovery from addiction. We will share insights from experts, inspiring recovery stories, and practical strategies you can use today. Whether you're in recovery, a healthcare professional, or someone passionate about emotional well being, this show is for you. Let's dive in and discover how fueling your body and brain with the right food, the right amino acids, and other key nutrients can fuel your transformation today. Welcome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. This is where you hear about how people have used feeding the brain what it requires to function optimally to fuel their recovery journey, whether it be from addiction, trauma, mental health issues, or just trying to live a better, more radiant life. We also hear from researchers and professionals and those who integrate their work into our sphere of things through the idea of the three-legged stool. So today I am welcoming Alyse Bacine, who has a wonderful recovery story of her own from an eating disorder and has integrated breath work and inner child work into trauma healing and helping people rise above in some very wonderful ways. So welcome, Alyse.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So why don't you start just by introducing yourself to all of us and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, okay. So my name is Alyse Bacine. I'm a breathwork and trauma expert. And let's see, I mean, it's a lifelong journey, but
It sure is.
I'll start with where when I discovered breathwork, which was actually at a very early age. I was 19 years old in 2001. And as you mentioned, I was struggling with an eating disorder. I was in my first year of college, and I just was looking for answers as to why I felt the way that I did, because I didn't know exactly. I didn't have anything major from my lens at that time happen in my life. I had a pretty good family and good upbringing, and I was just looking for answers as to why I was struggling so much, specifically with eating, but it kind of was with more than that, even just anxiety and just a lot of negative thoughts and overthinking and just not really feeling happy or present most of the time. So, I discovered yoga, and then I started working at a yoga studio, and they had a breathwork class there. And when I worked at the yoga studio, I pretty much did everything that they offered, and I read all the books that they had, and I started learning about alternative ways of healing and nutrition. And I became a vegetarian at that time, and I just started really immersing myself in all these different ways of looking at the world that I didn't learn, when I was living with my parents. So
Sure.
I discovered breath work through a class that was happening there, and I just knew that I was supposed to do more of it. I wasn't even exactly sure why, because that first time I don't remember having anything profound happen. I just felt different and I knew that I wanted more of it. And so I live in Philadelphia and we have a pretty amazing breathwork community here that offers breathworker training programs and a lot of different workshops and stuff. So I started going there. I started training as a breath worker. When I was 20, I did about 3 different breath worker facilitator trainings, a breath worker teacher training. I, followed my teachers all around the country as they were teaching, and I was really immersed myself in it. And I became a breath worker. And, by the time I was 22, 23, I was teaching classes here in Philadelphia. I was seeing private clients. So, it's really been such a huge part of my journey and also just my life in general. At this point, it's been a part of my life for more than half of my life. So it's something that is really just like integrated into who I am. But I think at that time, it really helped me understand why I was feeling how I was feeling. And it helped me to recover and accept myself and really start to like listen to my body and stop the behaviors that I couldn't stop before. So, that happened all at an early age. And then I also I have a bachelor's in education, and then I also got a master's degree in counseling psychology, and I was a school counselor for over 10 years. And so that gave me a lot of experience with children and trauma because all the kids I worked with were dealing with some type of trauma. I was a school counselor in the inner city here in Philadelphia. So I had a lot of experience with the effects of trauma on the developing brain and how trauma impacts children and how it will continue to impact them into adulthood if it's not addressed. So, fast forward to late 2019, early 2020, I finally, listened to what I had known all along, which that I was meant to start my own business and start helping people with breath work and all of the things that I knew. So I started my business in January of 2020. And it just so happened, March of 2020, we got sent home from school. So I never went back and I started to grow my business. And I initially thought I would be working with people just with breath work and, a lot of the stuff I know around trauma, but it just quickly developed into me creating my own methodology, the Metamorphosis Method, and my own processes to help people heal their family trauma, ancestral trauma. And I started to develop a pretty efficient process to address and heal the inner child as it comes up in certain situations and in the ways that it blocks you from creating the growth that you want to create in your life. So, here we are 5 or so years later. And yeah, I have a certification program. I have different programs that I work with people in groups and privately. And yeah, it's just been a whirlwind of growth since then.
Well, congratulations.
Thank
And,
you.
and congratulations on such a productive pivot through COVID.
Yeah, I mean, it really happened perfectly, just because of the
Yeah.
timing of everything. It was like the universe was just like, here you go. Like, now you have all this time to do this. So it just worked out perfectly for me.
That kind of happened for me too. Right before COVID hit, I got this really strong need to leave the big city and move to the middle of nowhere. And I had this sort of itch that said, if you're going to do it, you need to do it now. Don't wait. Of course, I had no idea why this don't wait was being so strongly whispered into my ear. I figured that one out a couple months later, so that when COVID hit, I was also perfectly situated to do my own personal development work and really in business development work and really move my school to the next level. And COVID gave me the perfect opportunity to make that happen.
Yeah, that's amazing, how that happened. It happened for a lot of people, I think.
Since our primary topic on this podcast is the role of nutrition and feeding the brain optimally in any recovery process, what are your thoughts about that? And what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so, my lens on, any type of repeated pattern of behavior, right? So if somebody's struggling to feed themselves properly or take care of themselves properly or, make decisions that are in support of their well-being, I always will look at what is the cause of that, right? Like, what is the trauma? What is the thing that happened? And when did it actually start that's creating this pattern of behavior, right? So whenever someone comes to me and says, I want to stop doing this thing or whatever it is, I'm going to be like, okay, great, but I'm not going to really focus on you stopping doing that thing. I'm going to look at like why you're doing that and how we can address that. So my lens on that is that there's something that happened in childhood that caused you to either have a belief about yourself or caused you to believe that the world was a certain way that is causing you to have trouble making decisions to take care of yourself. And, I always say to people that we treat ourselves the way our parents treated us. And what I see
Yeah.
with a lot of people is that people who had parents who neglected them in some way, or they were missing certain pieces of what they needed from their parents, then it can be hard for them to take care of themselves in that way because that wasn't modeled to them. And I also see with people who had more severe trauma or neglect that it is very hard for them to be organized in certain ways or to keep a routine in certain ways or
Mhm.
just to take care of themselves in certain ways. When I teach my certification, I always tell people like these ways that you can tell that people have had more severe trauma, and it'll be things like, not understanding how to, plan for the week of what food I'm going to need, or, their car is a huge mess, or things like that that kind of tell you it's very hard for them to, be organized and think ahead and take care of things because their brain is kind of always in that like fight or flight, or what do I have to respond to instead
Mhm.
of how can I, organize my life optimally so that I'm going to thrive.
And I think this is where the controversy lies around, say, a diagnosis like ADHD, attention deficit disorder.
Yeah.
Is it actually a genetic brain thing? Or to what degree is it a genetic brain thing? And to what degree is it the impact of trauma? And as you say, living in sympathetic arousal, where we just can't calm down our nervous system enough to think in a straight line.
Yeah, and I don't think there's one simple answer to that because I think it's
Right.
different based on each person. But what I saw when I was working with kids is that I saw a lot of kids that were diagnosed with ADHD, that it was just obvious they were dealing with PTSD, but the
That's right.
symptoms are largely the same. So, I think that if somebody has severe trauma, that we want to be looking at that versus just saying, oh, they're ADHD, right? But I think there are also are some people where their brains function differently and they are more creative or they don't see things linearly, or I mean I am like that, like I have to be
Right.
focusing on
Right.
25 different things at the same time. That's just how I function. And whether that's a result of trauma or not, for my case it might be a mixture of both, but I do think that there are a lot of cases like I saw when I was a school counselor that was obviously more on the side of
That's
PTSD
right.
versus ADHD.
That's right. And a lot of the same nutrients help people function better and help their brains function better, whether the problem is coming more from a wiring, an ADHD wiring perspective, or a trauma, stuck perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the only barrier with that is I think that some people who struggle with trauma might find it harder to consistently give themselves those nutrients because, it's harder for them to function inside of a routine, but I'm sure it would be very helpful
I
for
mean,
them to do so.
that's ADHD though at its core, right? So I have ADHD and I have trauma, and what the intersection is, I have no idea. Um, but I do know because hypnosis actually allowed me to get over my ADHD. But when I first was introduced to the amino acid tyrosine, which helps with energy and drive and thinking in a straighter line.
Mm-hmm.
I literally could not remember to take it because I was told you had to take it 3 times a day between meals, arising mid morning and mid afternoon. And after a month, I called my doctor and said, it's not working. And she said, well, are you taking it every day, 3 times a day, the way I told you to? I said, no, I can't remember. Can I take it with food? And she said, well, I think so. And so I started taking it, pairing it with breakfast, lunch, and mid afternoon snack. I could remember that. And at the end of a month, I called her back and said, it's working. I have more energy. I have more drive. I'm less depressed. And I'm even remembering things better.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about my clients, many of the clients of my students. We recommend that people eat 20 grams protein, more or less, every 4 hours to keep blood sugar very stable. Because when meals are missed and blood sugar drops, adrenaline kicks in, and adrenaline destabilizes us even more and actually creates cravings for addictive substances and behaviors. So this is a foundational part of our program. And some people can start making the switch and are able to do it, sometimes with a little bit of support.
Mm-hmm.
And other people really can't. And I think what you're speaking to, of course, is the barriers, the internal barriers, the nervous system barriers, the self-belief barriers that really get in the way of feeding ourselves, because feeding ourselves is the primary way that we receive love or didn't receive love
Mm-hmm.
as infants. One of the primary ways that we received love and structure throughout our whole lives or didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore can be so problematic for many of us.
Yes, absolutely. And I do, and I mean, I see that as a barrier, not just with nutrition, but with any like new thing that someone is trying to implement, whether, because I have a lot of women who work with me that either have businesses or want to start businesses. And they think it's a matter sometimes of learning more or having a different strategy or whatever, but then it's like it's hard for them to even implement what they learned or the strategy because
Mhm.
of the trauma that's underneath of it. And then also just to your point about the nutrition, I do a lot of work with my clients around what I call birth story, which is the circumstances around your birth from conception to 3 months old. And I had a client who, when she was born, her mom, I think the circumstance was that they wanted a boy and she was a girl. And, her mom looked at her and said, that she didn't want her basically. And, and this is different. This is not always black and white because I think different people internalize these types of experiences differently. But the way that she internalized it was that like she didn't deserve to live or she didn't deserve to be here. And one of the things she really struggles with is eating. Like it's
Mhm.
very hard for her to remember to eat. It's very hard for her to eat nutritious food or food that will fuel her body because she has this inherent belief that she doesn't deserve to live or she doesn't deserve to be here. So yeah,
Right.
that's, one example of I think how a deep trauma can impact your ability to feed yourself or to implement, the things that would otherwise be very helpful for you.
Well, and I think it puts people into a really serious detrimental double bind
Mm-hmm.
because we absolutely need the nutrients in our brain for our brain to allow us to make the changes that we need to make,
Right.
whatever those changes be,
Mm-hmm.
right? To do the doing, we need a functioning brain.
Yeah.
To have a functioning brain, we need to be feeding our brain on a consistent basis the nutrients that it needs to function. And now we're caught in a double bind,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because if we are too emotionally wounded to be able to feed our brain, and our brain is too starving to allow us to do the work needed to heal ourselves, ouch,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And this is why I really believe in what I've termed the three-legged stool model. Now, some people talk about four wheels in a car. Okay, but I like the three-legged stool, and the way I conceptualize it is the biochemical, i.e., brain, mostly bionutritional, but not always. The psychosocial, and then the spiritual.
Mhm.
And we can define spiritual in many, many different ways. I like to broadly, in my spiritual category, I have the ability to give and receive love,
Mhm.
self love, meaning and purpose, identity, having a place in the world, and the deeper sense of community connection.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In the psychosocial, yes, social is about, social connection, but there's a spiritual element to that too, which I think has to believe where you have to believe in, take down the walls of fear so that you can be open to receive connection from other people,
Yeah.
right? And give and receive forgiveness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's the second leg of the stool that you're really focused on is is healing the trauma.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because one of, obviously with my background as a school counselor, whenever I work with clients who are, having struggles with their kids, especially teenagers, that's one of the things that I always say is it's so important for them, when they're in that like individuation process to
Mm-hmm.
have that sense of community connection and also start to find a sense of purpose because I think that's something that these days it's a little harder for kids to find just because so much stuff is like online or they're a little more isolated and that to me is so important. I mean, it's important at all ages, but especially at that age where they're really starting to find themselves, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yes. So, I do think all of those are very important, but yes, largely we work on the childhood trauma that is impacting you today, and that's what I'm really focused on with people is not so much about let's dig around and figure out every single thing that happened to you in childhood, because I don't think that's necessary, but it's more about, okay, where do you feel stuck today or where do you feel challenged or where do you feel like you keep repeating the same pattern over and over again or hitting the same wall, and let's go back and see where that originated, what I call your core wound, and how you can address that as it comes up in your life now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so you do a lot of that through breath work?
Well, breathwork is one of the main ways, like the main modalities that I use. And it's really a way that I help people facilitate just accessing the subconscious mind, because a lot of what, when we're looking at where did this start or what is the core wound, it's not usually going to be something that someone is conscious of, or they may have a little bit of an idea, but it's not really going to be something they're aware of. So the breath work really helps you to access the subconscious mind pretty quickly. And then it also is really helpful in processing emotions. And that's something that is obviously very important because when we, uncover what it is that you are playing out based on your childhood, then we also have to be able to access and process the emotion that is associated with that, with that wound or that unmet need. So the breath work is a really great way to facilitate that and facilitate movement with it, because I feel like if we just are continuing to feel the emotion, it can kind of feel like you're in a spiral or you don't know when it stops. So the breath work will kind of
Mhm.
help you move through it in a
Mhm.
pretty efficient way. So I think for those two reasons, it can be really helpful. And it also just really creates momentum with people. It helps them to just move faster in the process. So it's something that I incorporate into, everything that I do with people. And then my inner child healing process is what I help people use to, identify the core wound and then address it in real time when it's
Mhm.
showing up. And the breath work is, one of the steps on that process in just being able to, like I said, identify and process the emotion efficiently. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's a big part of what I do. It's not the only thing, but it's a key aspect of it for sure.
That's exciting. I have colleagues who do a lot of breath work, but I've never heard it put quite that way before, or how it's very much integrated into healing core wounds.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. And it's just I think it's very efficient, and it
Mhm.
helps you like move the energy in a very intentional way. And then the way that I use it with my clients is I create these audio breathwork sessions where I'm kind of talking you through accessing specific things. So when we're
Mhm.
working on the birth story, for example, I have a breathwork session that's specifically around that to help you access whatever it is that's in the subconscious around that you need to become aware of and shift, at that time. So I use it a lot to like in a very targeted way to help people with specific things.
Mhm.
So, that's another way that I use it that's just, kind of what I've come up with over time after doing it and working with a bunch of people. So I use it that way. And then I also will facilitate live, on Zoom or, I'll teach live at retreats and stuff like that. So, I do a combination of all of those things with it.
Mhm. One of the things that we've found is that when people come into a session and they're very dysregulated, very labile, and it's very hard to get people to actually settle into their body. Have,
Yeah.
have you ever had that where it's
hmm
just hard for people sometimes to actually just ground and settle?
Yes, for sure.
And so I started maybe 25 years ago asking those people in session, well, when was the last time you ate protein today? And invariably now, Alyse, when I ask somebody that question, my gut already knows the answer. And because it's so obvious, once you know what to look for, when this person has a very dysregulated nervous system because they're hungry
hmm
and their adrenaline is running, apart from whatever else may be dysregulating them, right? This is
Yeah.
profound. So I'll say, well, when was the last time you ate protein today? And they'll be, oh, 8 hours ago, oh, yesterday, or,
hmm
and I will feed people in session
It's a great idea.
because I found that otherwise pretty much the entire session is wasted. I mean, maybe they'll be a little more grounded and regulated once, we do breathing and exercise and those sorts of things. But if that adrenaline is running because of low blood sugar, it's really hard to turn it off without food. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's impossible, it's just hard. So I'll feed people high protein snacks, sometimes even a whole meal, and I'll have people rate their symptoms on a scale of 0 to 10. And then 10, 15 minutes later, I'll have them rate the same symptoms. And 10 minutes later, their color's better, their whole body is relaxed, they're able to ground, they're able to breathe. And they
hmm
say, well, sometimes they say, well, we've just been talking for 15 minutes. And it was like, well, yeah, but we were talking for 15 minutes before I fed you.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that we're having this conversation now because I had an interesting experience around this type of thing yesterday. And as I've recovered myself with my own like issues with eating, I've been able to come into an understanding of like what my body needs and kind
Mhm.
of just intuitively knowing that.
Right.
And I have to have protein, like you're saying, it just, makes sense. And usually the like first thing that I eat has to be protein. So anyway, I used to eat a lot more like sugar and fruit like before when I was, in a different stage of my life. And also
Mm-hmm.
when I was more, not eating probably optimally for my energy or whatever. And in the summertime, I really love smoothies, and I used to
Uh-huh.
always have a smoothie. Like that was such a thing for me for such a long time in my life. And, yesterday I got back from a walk and, it's July, it's August, sorry, not July. It's August and it's hot, right? So I
It's
get
hot.
and I'm like, oh, what am I going to eat? And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, it's already August and I have not had a smoothie this entire summer. That's interesting. I'm going to make a smoothie. I haven't had one all summer. I'm going to make a smoothie. So I did. And, and I did put some protein in it actually. So I did, but so it was interesting. So I had the smoothie and I went on with my life. And then, like, I don't know how many hours later, 3 hours later, maybe, I was like, I feel like crap. I'm like, why do I feel like crap? And I even called my friend and I'm like, I'm in the worst mood. And I was like, and I don't know why. And then I was like, oh my God, I think it was this, I think I'm crashing from the smoothie. So then I ate some protein and I was like actually still talking on the phone. And again, I was
Mhm.
like, oh, now that I'm talking to you, it's making me feel better. And then I was like, oh wait, I think it's just that I actually like ate the protein and like stabilized my blood sugar. But it's just
That's
interesting
right.
because I hadn't been attracted to having a smoothie in so long. And there's like a reason why, because that doesn't work for me anymore, you
Doesn't
know?
work for you
It probably
anymore.
didn't work for me
Exactly.
before, but I just didn't know.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes us asking our clients the right questions to get them to figure that out too.
Yeah. Yeah, it is something that I think like, I always talk about this with my clients too, of like using, like looking back and being like, okay, well, when that came up, what happened? How did it feel? All of that. And I think it's the same thing here. It's like, okay, well, now that I just had that experience, now I know for
Mhm.
sure like how that makes me feel. And I can say with certainty that like that way of eating doesn't work for me anymore. And, the crash or whatever it was, it's just like, okay, I'm I'm operating the way I'm meant to because I'm eating the way I'm meant to, and there's a
What you're
reason
meant
why I
to.
didn't want that.
Well, and that's why I've started asking my clients these questions because they don't have many of them, some do, but most of them don't have the knowledge to connect the dots themselves the way you did.
Mhm.
And most therapists don't have the knowledge to connect the dots for their clients.
Right.
I mean, I had one lady who came to me, and I was her eighth mental health professional because she was trying to figure out why she had twice daily panic attacks for 10 years.
Wow.
Twice daily. And she'd gone to three psychiatrists and got put on medication, and she'd gone to therapists who helped her regulate her nervous system to manage the panic attacks, but not make them go away.
Right.
Right. And she'd done the therapy and the trauma work, and she was still having the panic attacks. So I'm number eight. And I asked, what time of day are your panic attacks? And they were upon arising at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And they went away after she ate breakfast, but she was too busy to eat lunch or an afternoon snack. And they went away after dinner. And I said, this is purely physiological. This is blood sugar. And
Yeah.
told her what to do and how to eat and how to get that protein in there. And we set an appointment for a week later, but she calls me a couple of days later and cancels the appointment and says, thank you so much. I have not, I also fed her in session. Okay. Because it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and she hadn't had lunch and she wasn't going to have a snack. And, that 4 o'clock panic attack was just waiting to happen. And so I fed her, and she said, I have not had one panic attack for the first time in 10 years since I walked out of your office.
Wow. That's incredible.
Isn't that incredible?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I'm trained in somatic psychotherapy, and we're trained to find different ways to resource the nervous system. Well, what's so often missing is using food, stabilizing the nervous system through food to ground and resource the nervous system.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that like, just for looking at myself as an example and like my journey, because I think
Mhm,
going through what I went through early on with eating, it really made me kind of go down this journey of nutrition and just like studying it and understanding it,
mhm.
all of that. And, getting to the point where I am able to listen to my body because I just didn't have
That's
that
right.
capability before.
No.
Um, and I think that it helped me to be able to naturally see like what works for me, um, and what doesn't. But I don't think
That's
I
right.
would have been able to, like, for example, like, when I was younger, I tried to just like kind of force myself to eat in a certain way that I thought, but then it just would never work out, or it like wasn't coming from the right place. Like it was coming from a place of like, this is what I need to eat to be skinny, or this is, so I
Mhm.
think that
Right.
like, then coming from a place of like, okay, I just want to optimize how I feel and feel good. It's so much easier to implement like what you're saying, because it's like
Yes.
it's natural versus it being like something that feels forced, and I think that is where I was coming from before.
Right. Right. And that's why, I have people rate their symptoms, go inside, check, notice how you're feeling, right? Really notice how you're feeling, and then eat. And then after 20 minutes, go back inside, notice how you're feeling. What's your agitation level? What's your anger level? What's your anxiety level? What's your tension level, right? How
Yeah.
are you breathing now versus 20 minutes ago? And I only have to do that a couple of times in session, Alyse, before people come back and say, "You'll be so proud of me. I'm so proud of myself. I ate before coming in, and I feel like I can actually do real work with you."
That's incredible. Yeah, and it's so simple, I think sometimes people can overlook that or, think that it's not a thing, but it's like truly just so like what's the word? Like instrumental, or like it's so like it
Yeah.
has to happen.
Foundational. It's foundational.
Foundational, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing, in I think to the point you were making about wanting it to be intuitive and organic, is we have something we call our 5-star pro recovery diet.
Hmm.
That to give the brain the nutrients it needs to function, we need enough protein, we need the right fats, we need the right complex carbohydrates to, get all those cofactor nutrients in there. We need it to be clean and as organic as possible, so we're not dealing with ton of toxins, which our poor liver has to get rid of. And it's personalized.
Hmm. For sure.
Personalized means that if it's your ethnicity, your lifestyle, your body type, it fits you.
Exactly.
And that's where the intuitive eating part comes in. Not just intuitive, but also knowledgeable,
Yeah.
right? But the foundation is, how do I feel after I eat? How do I feel when I don't eat? How long, I can now go 6 hours, 7 hours without food, although by the seventh hour, I'm beginning to notice it. But in the past, I couldn't. In the past, premenstrually, if I went any longer than 3 hours, I was dysregulated.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really does depend on the person. Like just for example, I've been vegetarian for a very long time, but when people hear me say that, I'm like, but not everyone should be. Like I think some people need to eat meat. Like don't go by me. I'm just going on what I feel for myself, but I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people do need to eat meat. I think everybody's like different and they need to follow what feels right for their own body.
Right, but then there's vegetarians and there's vegetarians, right? There's the people who know what they're doing and are eating to provide your body and your brain with the nutrients it needs, right? With or without meat products.
Hmm.
Then the people who are vegetarian and eating a really ultra processed, high carb, high simple, it's vegetarian and it's very nutrient deficient.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And once they start bringing in the right nutrients, some people stay vegetarian and can thrive, and other people find that, oh, this just doesn't fit my body very well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old, and my husband and I are both vegetarian. But we always
Uh-huh.
tell them, like, if you like, go try meat, see if you like it, see if it works for you. Like, don't just like, we're not telling you you have to be
Right.
vegetarian. It's just that we are, but you should discover what works for you.
Well, anything else that you'd like to share or share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to kind of reiterate, like, obviously your way of like the three stool method, and that's helpful in the sense that I think we always want to look at the whole picture, and that's something that I'm always thinking about with my clients too, is like, okay, well, yes, there's kind of the all the inner child stuff and the trauma stuff, but it's so important to just be looking at like every factor that's impacting
Mhm.
somebody, like even if it's just environmental or circumstantial,
Right.
I think like I was talking to a friend who just recently moved to Europe and is in a new relationship and had somebody close to her pass away. And she's like, why am I freaking out? And I'm like, well, there's all these things that just happen. You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like it's so important to
Yes.
always just be looking at the whole picture and not just one factor because, I think I always say to my clients, like, these are all the ingredients that I see in the pot, right? Like these
Mhm.
are all the things that I see that can potentially be impacting you in this situation. And I think it's important to like be aware of and address all of them. So I think it's never like a good idea to only just focus on one thing because we're very complex, multi-dimensional human beings, and there's always, you know, multiple things going on. So I think like looking at it holistically and the whole picture is really important. So, you know, I think that's the only
Yeah,
other thing I would say other than, like I think any pattern that someone's in where it's hard for them to
that's
make
right.
good choices is very important to look at why
That's right.
instead of just trying
That's
to force yourself to do it.
That's right. Because it's not going to work to force yourself, and then you're going to feel
No,
guilty and ashamed and out of control, right? And spiral even further down. And we don't want that. We want to
exactly.
under people and support the change. And this is why I've, done inner child work in my own healing for decades. And I've been doing it with my clients and teaching it for decades because it's such a very powerful healing modality.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think most things start in childhood. Most things that are prevalent or that are stopping us now, it's going to be rooted there. So it's definitely something that can't be overlooked. That's for sure.
Can't be overlooked. And you can even use it for prenatal trauma, for in
Yeah,
utero trauma.
for
I've had
sure.
in utero, quite severe in utero trauma.
Hmm.
And it's possible to connect with those very, very young parts of ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, especially if you're something significant happened while you were developing in the womb, and even not, even if it was just that your mom had a lot of anxiety or she was arguing with your dad or, the things were unstable, that's definitely going to impact you. So I
Sure
think
is.
that's so important.
Well, it's been lovely having you on this in this conversation. I've enjoyed it so much, Alyse.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It was so nice meeting you and hearing about your work. It's incredible.
Yeah, I want to dive a little bit more into your work and learn about that breath work because it's really intriguing. So
Yes.
thank you very much. And thank you all for being with us today and listening to this episode. If you liked it, please push the like button and subscribe to this channel and share it with anybody in your life who you think would enjoy it. See you next time. Thank you for tuning in to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. I'm Christina Veselak, your host, and I hope today's episode has inspired and equipped you with new insights and tools to support your recovery journey or practice. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who could benefit from the knowledge shared here. Stay connected with us for more episodes filled with practical advice, expert wisdom, and inspiring recovery stories. Remember, nutrition is a powerful tool in mental health and relapse prevention. Power up your recovery today. I'm Christina Veselak, and I'll see you next time.